The sound of my reading glasses shattering against the asphalt wasn't just the noise of breaking glass. It was the sound of my quiet, morning life fracturing into a million dangerous pieces. It was a Tuesday morning. The air was crisp, and I was standing at the edge of my driveway in Oak Ridge Sanctuary, checking a mailbox that seemed to contain nothing but bad news lately, when Linda Sterling's pristine white Mercedes SUV screeched to a halt right in front of me, the tires crying out like a warning I was too slow to heed. Out she stepped, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association, clutching a violation notice that was thicker than a humid summer night. And when I reached out to take it, expecting a conversation, she literally ripped the glasses off my face, watching them hit the ground with a cold, detached curiosity before grinding her designer heel into the lenses, crushing them like a beetle beneath her boot. The crunching sound still wakes me up in the middle of the night, a jagged reminder of the moment she said, "Pay up or pack up," looming over my destroyed property like a statue of arrogance, completely unaware that she had just declared war on the one man in this entire subdivision who knew how to hunt using nothing but mathematics and patience. My name is Arthur Vance, and for 30 years, I was a professional land surveyor, which is just a fancy way of saying that I spent 3 decades telling people exactly where their world ended and their neighbor's stupidity began, a job that requires a level of precision where being right isn't a matter of opinion. It is a matter of provable, undeniable GPS coordinates. After my wife, Martha, lost her long, brutal fight with cancer, the silence in our old family home became deafening, a heavy blanket of memories I couldn't breathe under. So I took the insurance settlement and bought a modest, single-story ranch here in Oak Ridge Sanctuary, 47 homes of manicured perfection where every lawn is cut to military regulation and every mailbox is a uniform, soul-crushing shade of slate gray. I thought it was the perfect place for a widower to grow old, drink coffee, and grow heirloom tomatoes in peace. But I was wrong, dead wrong, because I hadn't accounted for Linda Sterling, a 45-year-old real estate shark and HOA president who patrolled these streets like she was hunting fugitives, armed with a clipboard that she wielded like a loaded weapon. Her husband, Greg Sterling, sat on the city council, which gave Linda the kind of untouchable aura that let her act as if she personally owned every blade of fescue grass in the development. And her house, a sprawling corner lot fortress that smelled chemically sweet from over-fertilization, was the command center for her reign of terror. My mistake, my original sin in the Church of Linda, was planting a garden, nothing elaborate, just a few rows of tomatoes, peppers, and basil along my side yard to keep my hands busy and my mind off the empty chair at the dinner table. I had pulled the original survey maps before I even signed the deed, because that's what surveyors do. We check the bones of the land, and I knew my garden was 3 feet inside my boundary line. Perfectly legal, perfectly safe. Or so I thought until Linda appeared on day 3, her voice slicing through the morning air like a jagged piece of ice. "Mr. Vance," she said, her shadow falling over my kneeling form, "those vegetables are a violation of Section 4.7b of our Community Aesthetics Code." And I looked up, wiping soil from my hands, soil that actually smelled like life, and tried to explain that the covenants only restricted front yard agriculture, not side yards. But she just tapped her red fingernails against her clipboard, a rhythmic ticking that sounded like a bomb counting down. "I don't care about technicalities," she sneered, looking at my official survey documents as if I had handed her a dirty napkin. "This is about property values and community integrity, and the aesthetic committee makes decisions based on standards, not your little drawings." The audacity hit me harder than the summer heat. She was looking at a professionally stamped, county-recorded legal document and calling it a little drawing, dismissing 30 years of my expertise with a wave of her hand. And as she walked away, her heels clicking a retreat, I realized this wasn't about rules, it was about power, the kind of petty, suburban tyranny that thrives when good people are too tired to fight back. 2 days later, the first official notice arrived, a $500 fine for unauthorized landscaping, leading to an HOA meeting that felt more like a kangaroo court in a banana republic than a neighborhood gathering. The community center was packed with terrified neighbors who refused to make eye contact, while Linda sat at the head of the table like a corporate dictator, dismissing my Google Earth printouts and my original property plat with a bored sigh, announcing that the board prioritized harmony, over individual preference. And when the vote came down, 4 against me, with one coward abstaining, I walked out of that room with my footsteps echoing on the linoleum like the closing of a prison cell. But Linda had made a critical error in judgment, because she didn't know that surveyors are essentially detectives who solve lies instead of murders. We dig into the bedrock of public records, we cross-reference history, and we find the discrepancies that others miss. The escalation was rapid and brutal. 5 days post-meeting, a new fine appeared, this time for $2,500, claiming I had expanded my illegal operation despite the fact that I had merely added 3 bell pepper plants, which in Linda's twisted reality constituted a willful escalation of defiant behavior. I caught her that afternoon, parked across the street in her white Mercedes, photographing my garden with a telephoto lens like she was documenting a crime scene, the shutter clicking in sync with the hissing of my sprinklers, a surreal symphony of surveillance. When I confronted her, she rolled down the window just an inch, releasing a cloud of expensive, cloying perfume, and told me that she was building a file for legal proceedings, a threat that she tried to back up by calling the city code enforcement on me. But she had picked the wrong target because I called my old friend Mike at the code enforcement office, a man I'd shared coffee and blueprints with for 15 years, and when he arrived, he took one look at my garden, measured the setback, and laughed loud enough for the neighbors to hear, confirming that not only was my garden legal, but the anonymous complaint, clearly filed by Linda, was a waste of municipal resources. That night, fueled by righteous indignation and the kind of focus that only comes to a man with nothing left to lose, I dove into the county records, pulling every document related to the Oak Ridge Sanctuary development, the original plat, the HOA filings, the architectural guidelines, and the builder's notes. What I found was the first crack in her armor. The landscaping restrictions she cited only applied to areas visible from the primary street, and my side yard was completely obscured, meaning her fines were baseless. But more importantly, I found a buried clause in the bylaws that allowed homeowners to appeal any decision to the full membership within 30 days, a right Linda had conveniently never mentioned, lying by omission to keep her grip on power absolute. I confronted her the next morning at her door, handing her the highlighted statutes, but instead of backing down, she doubled down, her face hardening into a mask of pure malice as she told me that the rules were subject to board interpretation and that I would never find 3 board members brave enough to hear my appeal, slamming the door in my face with a finality that sounded like a challenge. While she was busy trying to bury me in paperwork, I filed a formal complaint with the State Real Estate Licensing Board, pointing out the conflict of interest in a licensed agent using her HOA presidency to manipulate property rights. But her countermove was swift and dirty. In an emergency session, I was barred from attending, resulting in a $7,500 fine for failure to appear and continued defiance. Standing in my kitchen, reading that notice while my coffee went cold, I realized Linda Sterling wasn't just a bully. She was running a shakedown operation, betting that I would fold, pay the fines, or sell my house just to get away from her. But she had no idea that she was tangling with a man who had spent his life finding the truth in the dirt. Then, the war turned physical. At 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, I woke up to the sound of rushing water, stumbling outside in my bathrobe to find my beloved garden flooded, drowning in 6 inches of water that smelled like swimming pool chlorine, originating directly from Linda's yard where her sprinklers had been manually redirected to spray over the fence. My tomatoes were ruined, soaked in a toxic slurry, and when I confronted her the next morning, she gave me a practiced, pitying smile, blaming unreliable automated systems, while her eyes danced with malicious glee, suggesting that perhaps I should relocate my garden to avoid future accidents. I knew this wasn't an accident, so I installed a high-definition security system, aiming the lenses not at my property, but at the perimeter, and sure enough, the flooding happened again a week later. Only this time I had 4K footage of the sprinkler heads mysteriously turning toward my yard at 2:47 a.m. and resetting exactly 3 hours later, a manual adjustment performed with surgical precision. But Linda wasn't satisfied with mere water torture. Thursday morning, I walked out to find my surviving plants covered in perfect, circular dead spots, the leaves burned away by a caustic substance that smelled sharply of concentrated pool chemicals, a scent I recognized from a dispute I'd surveyed years ago involving poisoned rose bushes. Reviewing the footage, I found the ghost in the machine, a dark figure in a hoodie moving through my yard at 2:15 a.m. with a spray bottle, the timestamp perfectly aligning with the absence of Linda's Mercedes from her driveway, proving she had parked blocks away to avoid detection. I didn't confront her immediately because a surveyor knows you don't present your findings until the map is complete, so I waited, even as the harassment escalated to criminal levels. Two slash tires on my truck, and a note pasted together from magazine letters that read, "Stop causing problems." A cliche so stale, it would be funny if it wasn't threatening my life. I called the police, and Officer Bennett arrived to take a report, but when Linda rolled up, feigning shock and concern, blaming rowdy teenagers for the vandalism, my surveyor's instinct to verify kicked in. I later confirmed with Officer Bennett that there had been 0 vandalism reports in Oak Ridge Sanctuary for 18 months, meaning Linda had lied to a law enforcement officer, which was strike 2. I hired a private investigator named Frank, a cynical ex-cop who specialized in harassment, and within 3 days, he uncovered a terrifying pattern. 3 other families, the Harrisons, the Kims, and the O'Malleys, had been driven out of the neighborhood by similar campaigns of terror, forced to sell their homes at a loss to a company called Sterling Ventures LLC, which was, of course, Linda's private investment firm. She was systematically devaluing homes with harassment, forcing quick sales, and then flipping them for a profit, a scheme so elegant and evil it took my breath away. She wasn't just a bad neighbor. She was a predator feeding on the equity of the people she was sworn to represent. Then came the lawsuit, served to me in the middle of a neighborhood barbecue for maximum humiliation, a demand for $150,000 in damages for lowering property values and threatening community safety, painting me, the victim of her poisoning and vandalism, as the dangerous aggressor. The threat became existential when a death threat appeared in my mailbox. Stop digging or be buried. Delivered by hand with no postmark, but my cameras caught her white SUV idling at the end of the street minutes before the delivery. I brought this to Detective Harrow, a man who had no patience for suburban drama but a lot of interest in organized fraud, and while he ramped up patrols, I decided it was time to deploy my own weapon of mass destruction, my GPS surveying equipment. I told Linda to her face, during a screaming match on my lawn where she accused me of destroying her reputation, that I was going to conduct a full boundary survey of the entire development, and the blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She knew, in that moment, that I was about to look under the rug she had been sweeping her secrets under for years. The next morning, I set up my tripod and fired up the GPS unit, which offers accuracy within a fraction of an inch, and as I plotted the lines of Oak Ridge Sanctuary against the county records, the horrifying truth began to emerge from the data points. It wasn't just a few feet here or there. 23 out of 47 homes had major boundary discrepancies. Houses sitting on land they didn't own, driveways crossing property lines, a chaotic mess of incompetence. But Linda's house, the crown jewel of her fraud, was the smoking gun. Her massive deck, her 3-car garage, and her glistening swimming pool were built entirely on a city utility easement, public land that belonged to the taxpayers, a violation so egregious that she was looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in demolition costs or fines. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. My vegetable garden was planted exactly along the sight line that exposed her encroachment. Anyone standing in my tomatoes could look down the property line and see that her pool was illegal, which was why she had fought so hard, why she had poisoned my plants and slashed my tires. She wasn't protecting the HOA standards. She was protecting a $250,000 fraud. I dug deeper and found that the original development survey had been filed by a firm that went bust for fraud months later, and Linda, as the listing agent for many of these homes, had knowingly sold properties with bad titles, concealing the boundary issues to close the deals. She had created a closed loop of corruption. She manufactured HOA violations to force people to sell, bought the houses through her shell company, papered over the boundary issues, and sold them to unsuspecting buyers who were inheriting legal nightmares. Detective Harrow and my lawyer, Elena Rossi, looked at my maps and the wire fraud implications. Using email to coordinate this scheme made it a federal crime, and we realized we weren't just dealing with a lawsuit, we were building a RICO case. We turned my dining room into a war room, covering every surface with maps, deeds, and commission statements, connecting the dots between Linda's harassment campaigns and the dates of the forced sales. It was a conspiracy of silence that had netted her millions, and I was the glitch in her matrix, the one variable she couldn't intimidate. Elena prepared a class action lawsuit representing the defrauded homeowners, while Detective Harrow coordinated with the FBI on the wire fraud charges, and we scheduled an emergency HOA meeting that Linda tried desperately to block, knowing that once the truth was projected onto a screen, her reign would be over. Linda's desperation spiraled into madness. She hired a sleazy attorney named Saul Goodman. No, just kidding. His name was Barry Fife, who filed a restraining order against me, claiming I was a stalker obsessed with her, presenting edited footage of me surveying near her property while conveniently cutting the timestamps of her poisoning my garden. But in court, Elena dismantled them, showing the judge the unedited tapes, the timeline of harassment, and the proof that Linda was the one lurking in the shadows, leading the judge to toss the order and reprimand Linda for wasting the court's time. But Linda still had one card left to play. She launched a smear campaign, papering the neighborhood with flyers claiming I was mentally unstable and dangerous, but she underestimated the community she had abused for so long. The neighbors, emboldened by my resistance, started sharing their own stories, forming a coalition of the fed up. And the tide turned so violently that Linda actually showed up at my door with a briefcase containing a $50,000 cashier's check. She tried to frame it as a settlement, but I recorded the whole thing, capturing her attempt to bribe a witness in a federal investigation, a recording that ended with her shaking like a leaf when I thanked her for the confession. She tried to run, planting a for sale sign in her yard and dropping the price of her mansion by $200,000 to offload the asset before the indictment hit, but I had already spread the word to every realtor in town about the boundary issues. When a young couple tried to buy it, their surveyor, alerted by the rumors, confirmed my findings right there in the driveway, leading to a screaming match where Linda blamed me for sabotaging her life, completely ignoring the fact that she had built her swimming pool on public land. In a final act of stupidity, someone broke into my garage and stole my surveying equipment, tossing it into a nearby creek. But the police tracked Linda's cell phone to the exact location of the dump site at 2:47 a.m., adding burglary and evidence tampering to her rap sheet. The climax arrived on a Tuesday night at the community center, a meeting so packed people were standing in the hallway, the air thick with the smell of cheap coffee and impending doom. I stood up before my neighbors, a retired man with a laptop, and projected the truth onto the wall, the red lines of reality overlaying the blue lines of Linda's lies, showing 23 homes with major violations and highlighting Linda's mansion encroaching 12 feet into the city easement. When she stood up to scream that this was a witch hunt, I simply pointed to the screen and said, "Linda, you fined me $150,000 for planting tomatoes 3 feet inside my line, while you build a pool on land that belongs to the taxpayers. I used a $300 GPS to prove it, and your fraud has cost this neighborhood millions." The room erupted. Elena announced the federal investigation, and Linda had a total meltdown, screeching about how I ruined her life over a stupid vegetable garden, until Detective Harrow stepped in and the police escorted her out in handcuffs, ending her reign not with a bang, but with the click of steel bracelets. 6 months later, Linda was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.1 million in restitution. Her husband divorced her and fled to Arizona, and her mansion was sold at foreclosure to pay for the removal of the illegal pool. But the real victory wasn't her punishment, it was the healing of Oak Ridge Sanctuary. We corrected the boundaries, I was elected treasurer, and the state legislature passed the Vance Act, requiring professional surveys for all property transfers to prevent this kind of fraud from ever happening again. My garden is bigger now, a lush sanctuary where the neighborhood kids come to learn about plants, and I've found love again with Elena's law partner, a wonderful woman who appreciates a man who knows where the line is drawn. It's funny, isn't it? Linda tried to take my home because she thought I was just a lonely old man with some dirt under his fingernails. But she forgot that the most dangerous thing you can do is push a man who has nothing left to lose and the skills to prove you wrong. So, I have to ask you, at what point does enforcing the rules cross the line into tyranny? And if you found out your entire neighborhood was built on a lie, would you have the courage to burn it all down to find the truth? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to check your property lines. You never know what or who might be trespassing on your life.